kids these days think they know about pre-workouts, but man, if you weren't around in like 2012 when that stuff was going crazy.
I want a pre-workout that's dangerous to take.
As structurally similar to methamphetamine as you can get is kind of how they used to do pre-workout.
Supplements.
Perfect.
Ranking supplements. How do we know what supplements work and what supplements work not so well, and then what supplements maybe just don't work at all?
You go to examine.com.
I love that website.
Yeah. They are great. They do great work, but
how do they know?
Exactly. I was going to say, but we should always, figure out how to formulate our own kind of independent assessment of things, because sometimes, things come out and they haven't made a page on it. It's not often, but it has happened. With dietary supplements, I wish there was an easy way to go about just saying like, hey, here's this easy way to know for every supplement what exactly you can expect, right? But I have in mass research review, like we've had so many questions about supplements that I had to create some type of system or heuristic to just kind of categorize. Like we can at least put them in bins, right? So I like to talk about supplements in tiers.
Like you're crying
not as
while
I'm
you're
crying,
discussing. Okay, I got it.
Tier 1, tier 2, and so on.
You guys don't use God tier, S tier, mid tier?
No, we should. And sometimes
a modern taxonomy.
Sometimes with supplement research, you also are in tiers because you're just like, how do they get away with this?
For sure.
Right? But anyway, so yeah, I like to put them in 5 tiers, and that's when someone comes to me and says, hey, what about this one? It's easier for me to say tier 3.
I love it.
Take what you will,
Eric, please talk us through the tiers. This is fascinating stuff, and I will arguably start crying.
Yes.
Tears of joy, of course.
Yeah. So tier 1, best of the best, right? And it's important to recognize these tiers, they only work when you have a pairing. So it's not just, is creatine a tier 1 supplement? It's for what outcome is creatine a tier 1 supplement, right? So whenever someone wants me to like, hey, what tier would this fall in? It's like, well, what are you trying to do?
Yes.
Right? And that's critical.
Although with the way most supplement research has kind of come out, a lot of it is actually just, and I'm not disagreeing, the way you're doing it is flawless, but a lot of supplements just have no tier and wish they do anything. So you don't even have to ask that question.
Yeah.
Like, what do I need to use XYZ powder potion pill for? Like, well, there's actually no use for it at all. So it's tier nothing on nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. So tier 1 basically means we have strong evidence. We know what this thing does, and what it does is good, and it matters. Like, this is a meaningful effect that is reliably observed, and we have good evidence to support that. So for most lifters who are like, hey, I want to be big and strong and jacked, what supplements are tier 1? It's a short list. It's creatine, assuming you're not a non-responder, and it's protein if you're not eating enough protein from your food.
Sure.
Right?
Casein, whey, egg, that whole thing.
Sure. Yeah. But if you're eating enough from your food, who cares? Forget it. Yeah. Right? So tier 1 is a lonely spot to be.
What's this? It's just 2 things.
For lifting, yeah. Like for building muscle, building strength, that kind of deal. Yeah. Tier 2, that's where things get a little bit more interesting. I think tier 2 is the most interesting tier.
The tier of promise.
Exactly. So tier 2 basically says, okay, there is some evidence related to this supplement for the outcome we're interested in, and it actually looks pretty good. But it's not on tier 1 because it has some shortcoming. So maybe the initial evidence is pretty good, but I'd like to see more of it before I get super stoked. Or we have a ton of evidence, but the effect is just kind of small.
Interesting. Okay.
Or we have a ton of evidence and the effect is inconsistent based on factors that we actually know. Right?
On average positive, but more stochastic than you would like to see it.
Right. Or it only works in like really unique situations.
Oh,
so it's
deficiency
like deficiency, or like, for example, when someone says, hey, I lift and I do cardio and I do team sport type of activities, should I have beta alanine?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I need to know a little more about your training, right? If you are doing like a 3x5 powerlifting program, beta alanine is not going to do much.
What about the tingle, Eric?
You can get the tingle, and that'll be great. When I was an undergrad, we had a little lab class where we had to like make up a little pretend experiment to all do, kind of learn how it works, right?
Yeah.
And no one wanted to do beta alanine for our little fake lab experiment. And I insisted. I was like, we got it. It's so cool, guys. This is when I was like in my big supplement era as a person. And so finally we convinced them to do it. And the TA accidentally messed up the dose for us and gave us, I think it was like 8 times the dose we were aiming for. And the whole class was just like, it was like someone released like a hive of bees in the room. And everyone's just looking at me like, great idea, Eric. This was, of all the things we could have done. I should have said, you should thank me that we didn't do sodium bicarbonate, because
that comes the other end.
Exactly. Tingling is better than that. But anyway, yeah, so tier 2 basically means like you can have a really solid evidence-based justification for this. However, you're likely going to have to acknowledge this is a really marginal effect. Like maybe this only matters for a competitive athlete.
Marginal and or conditional.
Yeah, or conditional, where it's like, well, for you, that makes a lot of sense, but for your friend over there, there's no reason for you to be taking that. So this is where most of the fun stuff falls, where it's like things that are promising, they're kind of, or interested to see how they might materialize, or there's some places where you use them and some places where you don't. So for example, in the lifting world and the kind of high intensity athletics world, you'll find things like sodium bicarbonate, beta alanine.
You got to be real careful with sodium bicarb. By the way, guys, if you didn't catch the reference last time, the first time the first research into sodium bicarbonate was based on theoretical inference, and they were like, this has to buffer acid in a way that really makes your short-term endurance, 400, 800 meter, like really profoundly better.
Yeah.
And they dosed it nice and high, and they realized it predictably causes explosive, uncontrollable diarrhea.
Correct.
And that was fun.
Yeah.
Until it wasn't.
Yeah. It turns out, when strong bases react with strong acids in your stomach, that matters.
Something comes out.
Things happen, yeah. So yeah, you have to be really careful with the dosage. And there's some new dosing strategies that are kind of like smaller doses over extended periods of days, things like that.
Fuck that. Double scoop that shit.
Yeah. That's the one thing where no one gets tough. It's like pre-workouts, 2-3 scoops. No one's doing that with sodium bicarb. But beta alanine, sodium bicarb, citrulline malate.
Okay, citrulline's in that dope. I used to talk about citrulline all the time.
Yeah.
And I actually watched your arc of you getting excited about it and publishing in various outlets, and then you were like,
I mean, if you're getting into science, like that was an element of my dissertation research, right? And if you're getting into science for the right reasons, in my opinion, you go into it because you don't know the answer.
That's really the only reason to go into science, I thought, but whatever.
Yeah, like I'm not there to prove a point, right?
So slowly backwards.
So I was seeing this interesting citrulline research emerging, and dietary nitrate I also put in tier 2. And I was saying, this stuff is cool, and nitric oxide supplements have been a staple for lifters since Ronnie Coleman on the NO Explode with the giant bicep vein.
That's how he got the veins.
I mean, so from the day I was into lifting, everyone was saying, your life changes the day you start taking arginine. And then we're like, okay, arginine kind of sucks, right? But good premise, and we can probably do better with citrulline or dietary nitrate, right? So I got really interested in those supplements. Emerging research was pretty positive. And it's not like it totally fell off. Like there's still good reason to supplement with those in certain instances.
Can you tell us a quick story, just a super quick story about citrulline malate? What is it good for, and who could consider taking it?
So citrulline malate so far seems to be good for strength endurance, which in the research world, that's the term we use for when we're talking about cranking out a couple more reps, basically. And so citrulline malate, I published a meta-analysis on it a few years ago. I'm old now, so actually it was probably more than a few, but...
I always say a few, and then it was like 15, and I'm like, oh, shit.
Not there yet, but it actually was, I guess, kind of a while ago. But, published that meta-analysis and said, there's a, small effect size around the, 0.2-ish range for a Cohen's D, which is like, okay, that's detectable, it's measurable, it's statistically significant, but, do you care about that effect size? Maybe. It depends, right? So, and then another meta-analysis came out, 2 years later, and basically in a slightly different research question, returned basically the same effect size. So then I said, okay, now we're feeling pretty good about it, right? So I think those are the areas where we have the most literature so far. What I'd be interested to see is how perhaps it can affect things like power, like in more explosive muscle movements. The reason I say that is dietary nitrate has been more studied for power outcomes and endurance outcomes. Dietary nitrate seems to be really good for high velocity muscle actions, producing more power output. Yeah. And that's important because a lot of the citrulline studies, they don't really emphasize a lot of really high velocity movements. So I'm not really sure yet if it's going to have that same effect on power.
And that's why, one of the reasons why it's tier 2.
Yeah. And even if it did impact power, to be totally honest, like for me to put something on tier 1 with protein and creatine, it needs to have an effect that is important enough to say, yeah, those 3 are going to be on the same level.
Yes.
So I don't think citrulline will ever get there. Right. And that's okay because tier 2 is a totally fine place for a useful supplement to live, right? And one other common one that I would put on tier 2, in addition to citrulline dietary nitrate, I would also put caffeine. Because
why tier 2? We're going to get a lot
1?
of flack for this. Where has caffeine in tier 1? I'm taking 18 grams of Ronnie Coleman's pre-workout for what?
Yeah. So caffeine's interesting because I can say, yeah, there are meta-analyses and even like umbrella reviews indicating it should have a positive effect on things like strength endurance, power. But when you look at the effect sizes and the consistency, caffeine is actually probably better for endurance sport than it is for resistance exercise. And one other thing with caffeine is we don't yet fully understand, in my opinion, the time course and degree of habituation that occurs when you use caffeine before your workout, every single workout.
Experientially, it's not great.
Right. And we don't know when you get to that point, when you say, I wouldn't dare work out without my pre-workout caffeine. Is that because it's still giving you an ergogenic effect? Or is it because caffeine withdrawal gives you an ergolytic effect and your performance sucks?
Scott, what do you think?
No comment.
We've all had our ups and downs with caffeine.
Yeah. And so another reason, aside from the unknowns about the time course of habituation, the acute time course of withdrawal, how that impacts performance in the gym.
Yeah.
Another element is I've been getting really into sleep because I like feeling good.
Weird.
Yeah. There's this weird thing about me where I like to wake up refreshed and spend my whole day feeling great. And
that ain't it, man.
Right. And so if you tell me, hey, I lift weights at 6 a.m. before I go to work, I say, great, knock yourself out.
Scoop it up.
Yeah. But if you're telling me that you're like sitting at your desk at 5 p.m. and you're taking the double scoop of pre-workout to get your, super intense workout from 6 to 7:30, and then you're like, I
6
did
to 6:30.
that 7:30.
No, I was saying like what people consider super intense is really 30 minutes of actual work. Like, do you really need 2 scoops for this, or what the hell is going on?
That's true. Now I get you.
Coffee exists.
Yeah, exactly. But and then they're like, I did notice that I stare at the ceiling for 3 hours a night, and it's like, yeah,
but very intently.
Yeah, you took like 600 milligrams of caffeine like 6 hours before you tried to go to bed.
For the record, at least back in the day, I think this is still true, Ronnie Coleman's pre-workout formula in one serving size has 550 milligrams of caffeine. How much is in a cup of coffee typically?
Usually about 100.
Is this Scott's video guy? Does that make any sense to you?
It's intense.
Well, I will say this. If you want to convince a consumer there's stuff in here,
you got to put a lot of stuff in
500
there.
There's like 500.
We have more than the competition.
If that was your goal, 500 milligrams of caffeine, 6 grams of beta alanine, no one is going to feel that there was nothing in that scoop, right? But probably going to have some folks who are like, yeah, I'm never touching that stuff again.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, so caffeine, kind of a mixed bag because it has definitely some main effects that we're interested in, but there's some matching to lifestyle effect problems, interferes with sleep, and it's you can get used to it, and then maybe you're kind of dependent on it, and so that's why caffeine is tier 2.
Yeah.
What does tier 3 look like?
Tier 3 is where the vast majority of supplements live, and probably will live for a very long time, because it is the tier where I tell someone, I do not have enough evidence to say that there is a defensible use case for this, but I also don't have enough hard evidence to tell you there is no way this will work.
Amazing. And that's kind of intellectually where supplements kind of start. Like a new supplement would enter into tier 3 and look up and down and say, where am I going based on research?
Exactly. Unless we have, practically speaking, yes. The only exception to that would be like if something with an extremely well-known effect in the food supply at the dose it's being supplemented at is brought to market, and we already know that sucks. Like that is just bad for you.
Hurt you.
Yeah. So like, but that would never get to market, right? Because even,
well, let's not say never.
well, yeah, no, you're right. But even supplement companies want to have enough meat on the bone that they can say, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing
Yes.
ever. Right?
Generally speaking, for-profit corporations have zero interest in hurting anyone because the worst case, it's legal liability, and sort of best case, it's terrible brand identity.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend they're looking out for you, but they are definitely looking out for them.
themselves. 100%.
Yeah, 100%. So most supplements do fall there, and this is where there's a lot of contention because not everyone has the same threshold for when something's ready to move up from tier 3 to tier 2.
And it is a bit subjective.
It's completely subjective until you codify it and say, here are my official rules. And even then, you might find you break your own rules.
Yes, and the rules are codified subjectively to begin with. So
Yeah.
But your system, Eric Helms told us about your system. And when he told us about your
Illegally,
system,
he's been plagiarizing left and right.
he actually says he's you a lot. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
You guys look almost identical, so it's strange. But I was ultra impressed with the system because yes, everything's subjective, everything's nuanced. But damn, a 5-tier system, the way you designed it is just so informative because once you learn about it, you're like, what tier is this? Someone's like tier 3, and you're just like, you're looking at it at the store. You're like, do I have extra money? Sure. Do I not? Fuck that.
Right.
But if it's tier 1 and someone's like, should I take this? You're like, oh, yeah, if you have the money, probably. What is tier 4 and how is that different from tier 5?
Yeah. So tier 4 is basically, we have evidence of what I would call a null effect. So I can look at the evidence for the supplement. It's not like there's nothing out there.
Right.
I can look at studies on it and say, this is not going to achieve what you want it to achieve. So this doesn't work is the simple explanation.
Isn't that great?
This doesn't work, and I know that to be true.
The supplement company CEO is like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. But it's not hurting you.
Correct.
It just doesn't do shit.
Right.
And that's probably also like huge numbers of supplements.
Yeah. I think without question, the vast majority fall in tier 3. The second biggest category is going to be tier 4, where it was promising in 1992 for about 6 months. Yeah. The first 2 studies looked great, and then the next 13 looked terrible, and we said, okay, don't know what happened with those first 2, but yeah.
Does glutamine fall into tier 4? For the purposes of getting you jacked and shredded, not intestinal health.
Right. I was going to say, for clinical applications, talk to a doctor, dietitian, a real doctor.
Real doctor.
Although I always joke, my PhD technically came from the School of Medicine. So I always say, like, well, back in med school when I was becoming a doctor.
Bro,
Yeah.
you can straight up get up on a plane and start fixing people's hearts if they
I believe
pass
so.
out. Yeah.
I believe that's true.
They're like, are you a doctor? You're like, I did get my doctoral degree from a medical school. Like, that's a weird roundabout way of saying that. You're like, don't worry, he's going to be fine.
My lawyer told me to put it exactly that way.
this way and no other way.
Yeah. But yeah, so when it comes to like you said, getting jacked, performing better, yeah, I think we've pretty much shut the book on glutamine.
That's painful. Hey, Scott, that's a good reel, huh?
Yeah. Feel short.
Yes, there you go. Can you list another few supplements offhand that might be tier 4 noteworthy? Maybe one more.
I would say arginine kind of sucks. Just because there's alternatives that are clearly tier 2.
Like what?
So like instead of arginine, you would just go straight to citrulline or nitrate.
Got it.
So I could never justify telling someone, yeah, arginine, go for it. I'm sure if you name a few more supplements, like everything that you can think of that's in the old supplement graveyard, that's what tier 4 is. The stuff that we thought was going to be super cool. D-aspartic acid as a test booster.
Yep.
Right? People were like, oh, this is going to be great. First study looked great. And then just totally flamed out.
Creatine ethyl ester does not leave the gut as creatine, apparently.
Yeah, and again, it's really easy to kind of view things as tier 4 when it's like, I have a cheaper alternative that does what that's trying to do infinitely better.
Yes,
so like
reliably so.
Yeah, why in the world would I mess with it?
Yeah.
Is a good reason to put it just in tier 4. Like, yeah, so creatine ethyl ester, even some of the back in the day, people were really getting into the buffered creatines.
Yes.
Like the alkaline creatines, and
Creatine hydrochloride fall into another category like that?
I
Tier
think
4?
creatine hydrochloride, I wouldn't put it in. I think there's research indicating it has a decent effect, but I think its main shortcoming, if memory serves, is that it fails on the promise that kind of justified its existence.
Somehow better than monohydrate.
So like I've heard a lot of people who are like, I used to take 5 grams of creatine monohydrate, but now I take an ineffective dose of creatine hydrochloride because I was told I could get away with only taking like 2 grams and it equals 5 of monohydrate. So that's where it fell short. And usually, like, I'm pretty sure creatine hydrochloride still works, but you still would need to take it in a like monohydrate-ish dose, and you would just be paying more for it. So it's not that we have evidence of null effect broadly, it's that we have no reason to overpay for it.
Amazing. Tier 5. What is tier 5?
Yeah, when I first started talking about this tier system and kind of started from 1 through 4, people were like, sounds like we covered it all. Why do you need tier 5? People kind of forget about tier 5 because when it comes to supplements, people are wired toward optimism in a lot of cases.
Not everything is inert, it turns out.
Right. And so a lot of times when people are going to try a supplement, they have this kind of faith. Well, if it's on the shelves, obviously the worst that could happen is I waste $25, right? But tier 5 is supplements that we have evidence conclusively indicating that one of two things is going to happen. Either this is going to literally harm your performance, or it is going to harm you. Like, this is not a safe thing for you to take. Yeah.
Wow.
It's either bad for you, or it's going to actively, it's not just going to have no improvement on performance, you will perform worse.
RP is a growing company. We're going to actually start a subsidiary company called Tier 5 Nutrition. Do you want to be an investor?
Sure. Yeah. I'd be happy to.
It's important to be tough in modern society. This
Correct.
coddling business. We're going to toughen you up by giving you stuff that's poisonous, or at the very least makes your physical training more difficult because now it's less efficacious. And that alone will get you mentally tougher.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say, start out your day with a 45-minute ice bath to build that toughness.
That's how I do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Hypothermia used to exist, but was largely overstated. So 45-minute ice bath straight into some tier 5 supplement that's just going to wreck your gut.
Yes.
And you will have no worse things happen to you that day.
The rest of the day is so great.
Yep.
That's what we're really giving you. Perspective.
Yep.
Are there any supplements currently still on the shelves that are tier 5, or can you tell us some that used to be on the shelves?
The most common scenario with tier 5 is that they actually started out as like tier 2. Like they were like, okay, yeah, this actually does something. Or even, depending on the outcome, maybe even tier 1. And we just found out like, yeah, it's just the side effect profile is not great. It gets banned. There's the tricky thing with tier 5 is that sometimes you could look at it and like what I call tier 5, you might call tier 2, but everyone's kind of too worried about a small percentage risk of an adverse outcome, right? So like, Mike, I'm sure you remember back in the day, DMAA, geranium
That's exactly
root.
what I was thinking of. Jacked 3D,
Yeah.
the original formula. Get that new formula out of my face.
Yeah, kids these days think they know about pre-workouts, but man, if you weren't around in like 2012 when that stuff was going
I want
crazy.
a pre-workout that's dangerous to take.
Yeah. As structurally similar to methamphetamine as you can get is kind of how they used to do pre-workouts. But yeah, so like back in the day, it was not banned by any athletic organization, certainly wasn't banned by the FDA, certainly wasn't a controlled substance by any means. So it was on every shelf at the major supplement stores. It was hard to find a pre-workout that didn't have it because frankly, why would you? It was
Golden
awesome.
era of pre-workouts.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic stimulant. However, there were serious adverse events reported. I believe that there were a couple deaths if memory serves, in military personnel.
Holy
that
crap.
were attributed to, and whenever you have these types of things happen with supplements, then there's always the fighting, the kind of litigation that occurs in terms of like, well, did they die because of the supplement, or did they die in proximity to the supplement while they already had an underlying heart condition? Or
People die for all kinds of reasons, and some of them also Venn diagram wise take supplements.
right. And so there's all that kind of stuff. And that usually is the case when you have things like, another good example is like ephedrine, right? Like all the ephedra kind of umbrella of supplements that were used as like stimulants.
And so that's tier 5 to you.
What I do as someone who usually is interacting with people who are either broadly focused on general health or athletics in drug tested federations, once it's banned by, all the big federations, then I say, all right, we're going to tier 5 it, you know? So like, yeah, it's the same kind of deal. People will debate. They'll say like ephedrine, different forms of it were effective stimulants. But again, there was, I believe, at least one baseball player died, and that was attributed to ephedra or ephedrine. And
There is no avoiding hard training if you want to grow. But if you want to grow the most, your training needs to be hard and smart. RP Hypertrophy app will make sure you're progressing on track, monitoring and adjusting your workout at all times. So for all that work you're doing, you can be sure you're getting the best results.
So I remember some of those stories, some of the reports, and at least in one of them that comes to memory, I believe it was a football player, but he died, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But he was taking something like 10 times the recommended dose.
yeah.
Can we still, no royal we here. Are you comfortable blaming the supplement? Or how does that moral landscape work out for you?
Yeah. So again, that's why I cowardly hedged my bet and said, whenever you get one of these bans going, there's always that process of, okay, like, yeah, this person took a pre-workout supplement and died. However, maybe they had a much larger heart than the average individual, and maybe they were doing a really strenuous workout and it was 105 degrees and humid that day.
And they were taking 5x the dose. Or
right.
whatever,
Yeah. And of course there's dosage considerations, there's drug interaction considerations potentially. So yeah, I would, for me to feel comfortable sitting down and making a determination, supplements guilty or supplements not guilty, I need to sit down with a literal dossier of evidence on like a case-by-case basis, which is one of the reasons that when it comes to my use of that tier system, rather than adjudicating every single banned ingredient and determining, was that a manufacturing quality issue? Was that a dosage issue? Was it a pre-existing condition issue? Was it a heat stress issue? For me, I will admittedly say I've outsourced some of that, because for all intents and purposes, like if you are, not a competitive athlete, general population person, and do I really see a need for me to say, yeah, you should be taking this like really potent stimulant to accomplish your fitness goals? Generally not, right? And if you're a drug tested athlete, I'm definitely not going to tell you, hey, this banned supplement, let's do it, right? So for
do you want to win or not?
Yeah. So for my context, I would say once something becomes pretty universally banned, it ends up in tier 5 because someone has determined that there's at least enough concern about potential for harm, or it just doesn't fit the legal definition of a dietary supplement.
Sure.
Which technically isn't dangerous, but also means that it's going to be banned, it's going to be harder to find, and things of that nature. So, but if I don't judge at all, but the untested side of sport is just a place where I don't spend my time. I don't have a lot of experience. Yeah. But if I did work in that area more consistently, then I probably would sit down with a few of these stimulants that are known to have appetite suppressing effects and, boost in energy expenditure type effect, thermogenic effects. I probably would sit down and have a more serious review of some of the underlying evidence to make my own determination of like, actually, I wouldn't have banned it,
Sure.
Yeah.
Eric, is there anywhere that you keep, and it seems like no, but is there anyone keeping a list of your tier system with supplements slotted into it? Like, can I go on some website on the internet and look up the tier system and see stuff in there that, of course, whoever's doing it, be it you or someone else, they have their biases, they have their predilections, etc. But just something, is there anywhere, like I know Examine.com does kind of a narrative review on every supplement, but they're not using your tier system, I assume, though maybe they should.
I'm trying to license it to them, but they
Get out of here, really?
They're very, very stingy. For a flat fee of $1 billion, I said, you can use this tier system all you want.
I mean, I think you're being generous.
Right. And they were under the impression that they were overpaying at that number. No, nobody uses it, to my knowledge. And I don't keep like a running list.
Right.
I probably ought to. People have recommended that to me, but I'm very busy, Mike. I've got a lot going on.
Do you have another job? Several, in fact.
No, I do think it would be nice to kind of put something like that together, but I will acknowledge when people have brought that to my attention, my first thought was, oh yeah, good idea. That's easy. I'll do it. My second thought was, it would be a bit of a bigger effort in the sense that you would have to make a kind of tier list for each prevalent supplement outcome, right? So like you'd have to have your tier for endurance outcomes, strength, etc.
Muscle gain, general health.
Yeah.
Cognitive boosting.
Yeah.
Sleep, recovery,
so
the whole nine yards.
It's a great idea, and it's completely feasible if it's going to be like, something you're really going to sink your teeth into and put some effort into it.
Somebody listening could make it. It would be wonderful if they did.
Yeah.
I would even pay good money to see, maybe not $1 billion, but I think 500 million is just a take-home easy sum.
You would think.
Come on, it's 2024. Yeah. Elon Musk exists. I would like to see that your tiered taxonomy be applied to all supplements on all effects, because I honestly think there are so few supplements that do anything at all.
Yeah.
We're talking about 10 to 30 supplements in tier 1 and tier 2 altogether. For everything. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong about that. What do you think, vibe check wise? Is that like...
No, I totally agree. And I think it would be really fascinating as someone who really enjoys data. I would just love to see the plotted distribution of like, if you just like paid somebody to just crawl through Examine, right? Mm-hmm. And say everything that's in their database, I want you to categorize on this tier system and, go outcome by outcome and just in aggregate, look at the volume of things in each tier. It would just be a massive sea of things in tier 3 and 4.
Yes.
And then, 1 would be a very lonely place, and you'd have maybe a couple dozen that find their way into 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the record, anyone listening, Claude 3.5 and GPT 4.0 absolutely can do that already for you if you simply point it in the right direction.
Yeah. And I was just joking about the idea of trying to like monetize that idea. The idea is not good enough or unique enough to monetize. So
nonsense.
If someone out there wants to do it, by all means, have at it. It'd be kind if you put a little footnote that said, I like Eric Trexler. He gave me the idea for this. But if you don't, my lawyers aren't coming for you.
Our lawyers will come for you, however, on your behalf.
There you go.